Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Ukraine is expanding its defense partnerships beyond Europe and the United States. A new agreement with Saudi Arabia could open the door to deeper cooperations on weapons production and technology, particularly in Ukraine's rapidly growing drone sector. At the same time, Kyiv is facing financial pressure and uncertainty over future Western military support. My guest here on World Talks is Reuben Johnson, Research Fellow at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. Reuben, so glad to have you here on World Talks with me this morning. Reuben, I first want to get your comment on the latest strikes. I mean, again, Russia using a Shahid drone to strike a maternity ward. How is this? How are you seeing all of this? And I mean, do you see an end in sight somewhere soon?
First of all, thank you for having me. Secondly, Russia hits a maternity ward of a hospital, and this is not the first time. There is a maternity hospital in Kyiv called Casimir that was hit probably a couple of years ago now. I mean, this just goes on and on and on, and until very, very dire measures are taken to strangle the Russians from their sources of revenue, it's not going to stop. And they've made the cynical calculation that they can outlast us, basically, that they'll put up with this longer than we will put up with arming and supporting Ukraine.
Reuben, what kind of dire measures are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about really turning the screws on the shadow fleet. And that does not involve enacting any new laws. It doesn't involve anything new other than enforcing laws that are already in place. That's one thing. And the second thing is that there are other financial mechanisms, other financial leverage that can be used against Russia as well. I mean, but it's going to take an all-out effort, and it's going to mean that the Europeans, in particular, along with some American companies and so on, are going to have to really, really stick by their guns. I mean, just in the past 2 months, there are Iranian-designed drones made in Russia that have crashed into targets in Ukraine, and they get inside and they dissect what is left, and they find parts inside of them from Germany and other EU countries. And this is in 2026. How is this happening?
At the same time, Reuben, don't you think that Ukraine is somewhat taking matters in its own hands and also striking facilities in Russia, right?
They're doing a fantastic job with that. And the new focus of the Russian strategy now is simple. It's rather than only hitting oil production facilities, they're hitting the facilities that are used at ports that allow the ports to load that oil onto tankers. So as of today, according to a couple of sources, including one confirmation this morning, 40% of all Russian capacity to load oil onto tankers for export has been either destroyed or degraded and is in need of repair.
Let me ask you, Reuben, how do you think that this war in the Middle East has affected, the war in Iran has affected the situation in Ukraine? And particularly, I want to ask you that question related to that there has been some concern that U.S. military support could fully be shifting right now to the Middle East and really shifting away from Ukraine. How realistic do you think that's actually becoming?
Well, I hate to say this, but this is beyond shameful, and this is an example of military procurement malpractice. Everyone who's got half a brain inside of the American defense community and inside of the defense policymaking community knew in 2022 that we weren't making enough of anything, not enough missiles for Patriot systems, not enough Tomahawk cruise missiles, not enough of anything. And after I almost died in the invasion and got to the United States, I started calling around to people saying, how long will it take to spin up production for this stuff? Because we're going to need a lot more of it. And the answer was, well, it'll take 2 years. Fine. That 2024. When I talked to the same people 2 years later and I said, okay, how long before we start getting bigger numbers? Same answer, 2 more years. The answer never changes. Now, how is that possible? How is that possible when we have people sitting in the Pentagon who supposedly understand the trends of warfare and what they can expect future demands to be. And yet, no measures have been taken in 4 years to dramatically increase production of so many critical systems. And that's why people start saying, oh, well, let's just cut off the Ukrainians. That's their first go-to. That's their knee-jerk reaction. So you're going to penalize the Ukrainians when they're the only ones helping our Middle Eastern allies fighting the Iranian drone warfare.
Right, and speaking of that right now, so Zelensky, Zelensky did send a team there to the Middle East, of course, just as you mentioned. But what stands out to you in this latest defense agreement between Ukraine and Saudi Arabia? And don't you think, Reuben, that it's going to give some kind of leverage for Ukraine?
Well, I don't know if I don't know so much if it's leverage in this leverage, yes, perhaps in the sense that the Saudis and these other countries will weigh in and perhaps provide some financial support, because the money that Ukraine was supposed to be receiving from Russian frozen assets has been blocked again by the pro-Russian government in Hungary.
Yeah.
So there are, how should I call it? There are miscontents or malcontents within the EU and NATO who want to cut Ukraine off financially. This could be a way for them to circumvent that financial blockade. The other thing I could say is that I hope what this means is that the long running potential romance between Saudi Arabia and the Russians in the defense industrial sphere may be over. Thank goodness. Sorry.
Reuben, do you think that, at the same time, this new partnerships, of course, there are also, there's word that Ukraine is also in talks with not only Saudi Arabia, but also Qatar, also the United Arab Emirates. How significant do you think that this growing defense outreach to Gulf countries, and do you think that these partnerships or new partnerships would be able to, I know I said leverage, but could actually help Ukraine scale up its drone industry and reach international markets? Hence, like you're mentioning, right, that Ukraine does need more money.
Well, they need more money. They need more funding. But the other thing that they need is that right now, Ukraine's own domestic drone production is pushing along at basically maximum capacity. And right now there are laws that literally prevent Ukrainian companies from exporting many of the items they make internally. So one of the things that these countries could do would be allow Ukraine to set up second production lines outside of Ukraine in their countries, in Qatar, in the UAE, and in Saudi Arabia. But again, just like the American defense community, these Gulf nations, they've been asleep at the switch. They've been watching Iranian drones hit targets in Ukraine for 4 years. Did the thought ever occur to them that those same Iranian drones might be fired against them someday? I can't imagine. No one never thought that was possible, but they didn't do anything about it.
Why not, Reuben?
Well, lots of reasons. One I can think of, it's rather unpleasant to say this, but there's an awful lot of dirty Russian money in some of those countries. And there's an awful lot of influence by the Russians in some of those countries. And there's always also, I would say, in addition, there's always also been the sense in those countries that if they spend enough money buying enough expensive weapons, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, if they buy enough expensive weaponry, the Iranians will be too afraid to attack them. Well, you can see they're not. They're not even afraid to attack Israel.
Right. Reuben, do you think that moving forward, since you did bring this up, do you think that the relationship between these Gulf countries, particularly the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, is going to change with Russia? Now that we've seen, U.S. military bases across the Gulf regions, being completely shot down, and
I doubt that their relationship with wealthy Russians who have a lot of power and influence will change. I would like to think their relationship with the Russian government will change, simply because I don't see what they're getting out of it at this point. Russia doesn't offer them anything anymore.
How concerned, Reuben, should Ukraine be about technology transfer when working with new partners in the Gulf region?
Well, that's a big concern, but it's not the first time. I've written about this in the past, I think maybe as far back as 2 years ago. And there were already complaints by the Ukrainians that not nations from the Middle East, but that European nations would come in and say, "Oh, we'd like to work with you and be partners." And then they claimed the European companies were simply stealing what the Ukrainians were doing and copying it, and then going off and making products on their own. So they're always going to be concerned about this because it's already happened to them.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of Trump's recent remarks, where he said that that he may not need Ukraine's drone tech?
Well, let me say that I believe there may be some people around the president who are not giving him the best, most up-to-date advice. That's clearly not true. When the Ukrainians have a drone interceptor that costs between $1,000 and $2,000 to make, we should be looking at that very carefully. And I mean, we should be figuring out how to do the same thing, not take their design and gold plate it and turn it into a $20,000 drone interceptor.
Finally, Reuben, what do you think is going to matter most for Ukraine this year? Military support, financial stability, or building new defense partnerships like the one that may be in works right now with between Ukraine and the Gulf states?
Well, financial support in the short term is going to be the most important thing, because this war costs a lot of money to maintain. And we're talking about $90 billion, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of held up, suspended in midair. But these defense partnerships are tremendously important, because if they're handled properly, and if they're organized in the manner that international defense production is normally organized in the format that they're normally organized, the Ukrainians should be receiving license fees. When you build somebody else's weapon in your country, the person who designed it gets a license fee from you. That's you're paying back part of the money they spent in R&D. And if those production agreements are organized in a way that they get the proper royalties for this, that could be extremely beneficial for them in the long run.
Thank you so much, Reuben Johnson, Research Fellow at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, for all your input here this morning with us on World Talks.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for watching this episode of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Sky. I'll see you next time.